Muslim belief is two things in one. It's a divine message, but at the same time it's also a miracle.
ورسول الله معلمنا هذا القرآن يوحدنا لطريق الخير يوجهنا الله تعالى أنزله ورسول
For any book to claim that it is a word of Almighty God, for any book to claim that it is a word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it should stand the test of time, whether it's the age of poetry and literature or it's the age of science and technology.
Some other religions, they conflicted with science. They used to kill and persecute the scientists because now they would show contradictions in their books. But it's amazing that Islam leads the way to science.
And whereas the earlier books came with many scientific mistakes due to the hand of man having delved into them, the Qur'an had none of these contradictions.
So you have a person who couldn't read or write, and he came from this culture where almost nobody could read and write, and they were just in the middle of nowhere, so to speak, and they were on the fringes of the civilized world, and they really didn't have any science, they didn't have hardly any kind of knowledge to speak of.
The Big Bang Theory, which the scientific world unanimously accepted in the 20th century, proves that the universe came into being with a giant explosion.
They call it the Big Bang. And they said initially there was one primary nebula, which later on it separated with a Big Bang, which gave rise to galaxies, stars, sun, and the earth we live in. Imagine, this information which they came to know recently, the Quran mentions 1400 years ago.
That the heavens and the earth were once a compact mass, and then we split them asunder. So the Big Bang Theory, which seems to be heavily supported by physical evidence, and the Qur'an also would support it.
You know, this is something that went completely against scientific, quote-unquote, scientific knowledge or the world view in that era. You know, the Greeks, they had this idea of the heavens are these perfect crystal solids.
When Einstein was dealing with the theory of relativity, he saw that the implications of his theory were that the heavens are not fixed. And he said, wait a minute, that can't be right.
In the 1920s, astronomer Edwin Hubble came to work at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Southern California. The observatory offered some of the most advanced technology of the time. After many years, Hubble could sit down and look at this great quantity of information, and he plotted a chart. He plotted for the nebulae the motions against the distances, and he found something truly amazing. Hubble's startling discovery means that the universe is expanding. And that concept forms the basis of the Big Bang Theory, which says that the universe began between 10 and 20 billion years ago from a state of enormous energy, density, and compression, and it has been expanding ever since.
Form of the word musi'un, it indicates an action that's going on in the present and will continue into the future.
He wraps the night in the day and wraps the day in the night. The word here in Arabic to wrap is takwir. And takwir means, if you go to the classical dictionaries, you see the wrapping of a turban.
Okay, and this verb, yukawwir, is used you talk about when you're wrapping a turban around your head. So here you have something that's going around a spherical object.
Does that indicate the roundness of the earth to you, or the flatness of the earth?
Scientists have long studied how various creatures communicate. Dolphins in the water, chimpanzees on land, birds in flight. But insects, could they possibly have anything to say? Well, when it comes to the tiny ant, it turns out the answer may be yes.
This is a halo climb, a meeting of fresh and salt water. Fresh water from the jungle flows over the heavier salt water from the sea. The saltwater layer is extremely low in oxygen, making it a particularly difficult place for animals to live.
Cytoplasm is a gel-like substance found enclosed, contained within by the cell membrane. It is within the cytoplasm that most of the activities of the cell can be found. It's made up about 70% of the cell volume and is mostly water.
Through today, it is a question that is also documented in the Holy Qur'an. Simply put, it is, how does man develop? No such distinctive and complete record of human development existed before the Qur'an. It was many centuries afterwards that the human developmental stages were recorded in traditional scientific literature.
The two statements that I have, the key word in both is al-guide. The two statements taken together can be considered the period of early embryogenesis from insemination to early implantation of the fertilized ovum.
Intensive studies of the Quran and Hadith in the last 4 years have revealed a system for classifying human embryos that is amazing, since it was recorded in the 7th century AD.
As a medical doctor, particularly attracted when I read the Quran in the original text for the first time, these data concerning man were those which impressed me the most.
As far as it is known from the history of embryology, little was known about the staging and classification of human embryos until the 20th century. For this reason, the descriptions of the human embryo in the Quran cannot be based on scientific knowledge in the 7th century. The only reasonable conclusion is that these descriptions were revealed to Muhammad from God. He could not have known such details because he was an illiterate man with absolutely no scientific training.
I find it very interesting that this sort of information is in the ancient scriptures of the Holy Quran, and I have no way of knowing where they would come from.
It strengthens the belief that God transmitted through Muhammad bits of his knowledge that we have only discovered for ourselves in recent times.
This individual, Muhammad, had to be developing this information from someplace. So I see nothing here in conflict with the concept that divine intervention was involved in what he was able to write.
You will recognize pertinent passages in the Holy Quran. With all this remarkable progress, much of what we have discussed has already been described, and with infinitely more elegance, in the Holy Quran.
Muhammad came from, he was after all a Bedouin. I think it is almost impossible that he could have known about things like the common origin of the universe, because scientists have only found out within the last few years.
The world thought there could be no reconciliation between religion and science. But the Quran mentioned many scientific facts in great detail, like how a human being developed in the mother's womb, and described other scientific facts which amaze the world's renowned scientists and scientific community.
So when scientists themselves discover these things, it is a major proof that the Quran is actually the Word of God.
For the first 35 years of my life, I was a disbeliever, and I didn't believe in God. But ever since I was small, I was interested in science. And I bought the Quran, English translation of the Quran, and when I started reading it with the same idea that just like Bible, it was written by man, only in this case we know the name of the man, Muhammad. But then as I read later, I suddenly saw a scientific fact which I knew was only discovered in the 20th century. So immediately I saw that Muhammad is not the author of the Quran. That Muhammad is a messenger sent by God to give the Quran to mankind.
There is no human work prior to modern times that contains statements which were equally in advance of the state of knowledge at the time they appeared, and which might be compared to the Quran. The major notion to be derived from the Quran concerning the creation, all this is in perfect agreement with modern ideas.
So I'll look at this Quran and I'll see what it is. I started reading the Quran. I read it completely all the way through the first time. It was unbelievable. Everything started to fall in place. Everything made sense.
God showed me His guidance. And when I pray, I make dua, God, please let me die as a believer. Let me never disbelieve again.
The Holy Quran is not a book of science. S-C-I-E-N-C-E. It's a book of science. S-I-G-N-S. Science is a tool to increase faith in the one true God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وحقق لي مرادي نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد وانتشت روحي وصار الدمع يجري يا إلهي خذ بقلبي للرشاد أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد وانتشت روحي